Hi, this is Kim Seiberling returning to you with our second I Saw the Sign series on interior signage. Today I want to talk to you strictly about interior signage and some concepts and things that your church can do to improve your interior signage. I have several things I want you to think about and several things I want you to consider as you look at your church's interior signage and consider changing it. The first thing I would ask that you do is I would ask that you ask, what is the sign doing? In other words, what important or pertinent information does this sign have? The first major type of signage that you have in churches is directional signage. Directional signage is very important because without directional signage, people are lost. They don't know where to go. This is particularly detrimental if you have first-time visitors and guests. And we want those guests and visitors to feel welcome, and we want them to feel empowered. This is probably the most common types of new signage that churches put in. This is the signage that at the front of the door would tell people, do I go right? Do I go left? Do I go straight? Do I go up the stairs? Do I go down the stairs? How do I get to where I'm trying to go? It is not uncommon for people to say to me, well, I already know how to get there. I've been going to this church for 10 years, and I think that's wonderful that your church has longtime members. However, first-time guests don't know how to get around your building, and they often find church buildings and church layouts very intimidating. So directional signage is very important. Some directional signage is very practical. If I want to go to church, I need to know how to get to your sanctuary. If I'm in your church, at some point in time, I'm going to want to know how to get to the bathroom and to the restrooms. So directional signage is crucial, and people could even argue the most important type of signage. The second type of signage that I would submit to you is what I call descriptive signage. So, if I walk through the store, describe for me what the usage of the room is. So, you might say this room is the nursery, or this room has many purposes, or this room is the sanctuary. Those are important descriptions that we're going to want to label for our guests. One note that I would like to make is that in your church, almost every door should have a room number. If you get out the original architectural plans of your building, chances are that those rooms already have been assigned numbers. I recommend to most churches that they use those numbers on every door. Now, there are exceptions to this. Some of you are asking, do I need to put a number on this door that leads into a hall? Or do I need to put a number on this door, it's just a janitor's closet? My advice to you is that if that room is big enough to be used for something different in the future, it should be numbered. I only say this because I'm a college professor, and you can ask anyone who's visited me in my office that I have my office in what used to be a broom closet. So when they started using that room as an office, they had to rearrange or reassign numbers in that building. So if that room is big enough that it can eventually be used for another purpose, I advise churches to number that room so you don't have to go back and renumber all of the rooms or half the rooms in your church. That's super inconvenient. So you want to always think about the future with your signage. The next kind of signage that I like to talk about is directory or map signage. This signage can be helpful if you have a confusing layout to your building, maps can be super helpful to helping people figure out where they are and how to get where they're going. I think maps make things clearer for people. The same with directory signage, which is what we have there on the right. Sometimes directory signage can get very long. It can get very in-depth, but again, we're giving a full list of what is in your building, and that does often get long. The final kind of signage I want to speak to you about is regulatory signage. There are federal, state, and local guidelines about signage that all churches should be aware of. Be aware of the American Disabilities Act. It is true that not all churches, or churches in general, are not required by law to comply with the American Disabilities Act. However, this does not mean your building is exempt from the American Disabilities Act. So for example, if you're a church and you have a preschool or you have other small businesses in your building or other businesses that run out of your building, you do need to be ADA compliant. So just because you're a church does not mean that your building is exempt. And then I always like to remind churches that there may be specific state and local regulations, so make yourself aware of those too. So as soon as we've decided what the purpose of our sign is, what our sign should say, we need to consider what type of signage. In other words, how is this signage going to be displayed? The first and probably one of the most common types of signage is wall signage. When you think about signs, you think about affixing something to the wall. So if you look on the right, we have a gentleman holding a silver frame, and this is what is called a snap frame. If you look in the upper right hand corner, this frame opens up so the plastic insert can be taken out and the panel behind it can be interchanged easily. In the same manner, the bottom picture in the middle can be changed out. Those little round silver things can be unscrewed. The glass plate comes off and the piece of paper that would be in between the glass plate and the black backing can be taken out. I always encourage churches to please consider interchangeable signage. In other words, signage that can be easily changed out. It is not uncommon for a church to change rooms. It is not uncommon for a church to decide that's not where the choir room is anymore. We're going to move the choir room over here and we're going to move this children's room over here. I think it's great that churches are constantly assessing and they're adaptable to the needs of their faith community, but it does make keeping up the signage difficult. So please consider the long-term usage of your signage. Now, some signage probably isn't going to change. So in all likelihood, your restrooms are going to remain your restrooms. And then your name of your church is probably going to remain the name of your church. So in that case, more permanent signage is appropriate. So that is something to consider. How permanent is this signage? And that will affect the type of wall signage that you choose. The second type of signage I'd like to talk about is signage that hangs from the ceiling. Signage that hangs from the ceiling is really great in open spaces with high ceilings. Often, with really big spaces, it's difficult to find enough room on the walls to hang signage. And so in this case, the ceiling signage is appropriate. You can see there the ceiling signage can be very colorful. It can be printed to say anything that you want. And ceiling signage can also be made in-house using paper, a laminator, some clear string, and paper clips. I don't recommend that for long-term usage, but if your church is truly, truly on a budget and it is truly all you can afford, that signage, if printed professionally, can be acceptable, and it's better than your guest being lost. The next type of signage that I would submit to you is what I call freestanding signage, and there's a variety of types of freestanding signage. On the left, we have what I call banner signage. So these are the types of banners that you would see at perhaps a trade show. And what I love about these banners is that they can be moved anywhere. So if you have something like that walk-on banner, that can be placed anywhere in your church. Or if there's a wedding or a funeral and that's not appropriate, that can easily be taken down. A lot of these banner signs are fully retractable, so they don't have to take up a lot of room if you don't want them to. The other thing I love about freestanding signage is often you'll walk through a door and you'll look around and you'll say, my eyes automatically go to this spot right here, but there's no wall to hang a sign on. And my ceilings are really too low for ceiling signage, so what do? In those cases, freestanding signage is an awesome option for you. In the middle, you have a sign. I love to use these kinds of signs to have at an entryway where you might be able to weekly print out a list of events and the room numbers. You might consider a directory as you enter the door on signage like this. And then I love the little brochure holder underneath it. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for churches to put out information about their weekly worship, their children's programs, and their youth programs to advertise to the community members who use their building throughout the week the wonderful programs that their church offers. On the far right, we have what's called a sandwich board sign. Sandwich board signs are usually used to guide people, but they are usually temporary. Sandwich board signs usually don't sit up all the time. The other great thing about sandwich board signage is that it can be changed out. It can easily be erased. So for example, if you have a Wednesday night program and you're trying to direct people to specific rooms on that Wednesday night program, but you don't want that sign out there on Sunday because of course those rooms are being used for other purposes and that Wednesday night program isn't happening, a sandwich board is a great alternative for something like that. The final type of signage I want to discuss is electronic signage. And electronic signage is pretty easy. It's just signage that you need electricity to run it. So on the top left, we have a traditional LED ticker tape sign. It's probably the first type of electronic signage to have come out. And then on the right, we have some electronic signage that has become very popular in many churches. And this is the TV screen or the display monitor. And this TV screen or display monitor might cycle through a series of slides that has your announcements on it. Monitors and TV, surprisingly, are priced about the same. And so that's been really interesting as I've gone around and done consulting. So when you price them, don't automatically assume that a monitor will be cheaper. Make sure your church does its homework and that you go around and you price both monitors and TV because they can both be used for the purpose of electronic signage. The next thing I want to talk to you about is how you decide what signage goes where. I recommend to churches that they conduct an audit of their signage. And what I tell them to do is to go through their building and just make their best educated guess as to where signage is most appropriate. So, for example, great places to put signage is as you enter a building. As you come into your building, what choices are you faced with? Do I have to go straight? Do I have choices between going left, right, or upstairs or downstairs? Any place that you are standing and you have choices about where to go, and the current signage does not clearly tell you where different things are located, you're going to want to put a new sign there. Now try to remember, you're looking around and thinking, where am I going to put a sign? There's no wall. The ceilings are too low for ceiling signage. Don't forget about our freestanding signage. So just because there's not a wall in the appropriate spot doesn't mean that signage can't be put there. So you're going to go through your building, and everywhere where you're faced with a choice, but you're not given information about where to go, you're going to get one of these big giant Post-it notes. These Post-it notes are available at any office supply store. I've even seen them at big box stores. So you're going to take these giant Post-it notes and you're going to write on it the arrows that you would want and the words. So you might say, put on that left arrow, nursery, right arrow, sanctuary, arrow upstairs, youth wing. Whatever you're going to put on the sign is what you want to put on these Post-it notes, and you're going to stick that Post-it note where you would envision that sign. The next thing you do is you recruit people who have never been to your church before to come into your church and look at your mock signage. Another thing you're going to want to put in the bottom of that mock signage is the type of sign and the size of the sign that you envision there. So if someone says, I think this sign should be bigger, you can look in that corner and say to the person, well, in reality, this sign is slated to be 3 feet by 2 feet. And then they're going to say, oh, yes, that should be big enough. Or they'll say, oh, no, that sign isn't big enough. But what we're looking for when we get people to come through our building for the first time is to see if they can find key and strategic locations in our church. So I'm going to take someone to the front door and I'm going to say, I would like you to find the sanctuary. And then you're going to say, from here, can you find the fellowship hall? And then from the fellowship hall, I'm going to say, can you find the nursery from here? And after they've been able to go to 3 or 4 strategic places, you're going to know whether or not you have effective signage. Now you're going to want 4 or 5 of those people to come to various entrances in your church, and you're going to want them to go to different places. If they can't find the key locations, it is going to be important that you make a note of where signage needs to be added. You're then going to add signage in those strategic locations and bring new people who have never been to your church back again. Once all that signage appears to be effective, you're now going to have notes about how big the signage should be, what type of signage it is, and what the signage should say. It is a great starting point for finalizing your signage so you can place an order with your signage or printing company. I want to remind you that now is also a great time to consider your visual identity. Are you able to integrate your church logo into your signage in some way? Are you using the same fonts and colors that your church uses in all of their advertising? The signage can really help bring the personality of your church together to communicate to their guests that they are important and that we want you to be able to easily find your way around our building, and that they're not guests, but they are meant to be family to the church one day. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast on signage. I hope you tune in again in a couple of weeks as we talk about exterior signage. Have a great day.